Suzanne Price coming up here. Again, one of those things, how do you introduce somebody who you've known for so long? We met back in 1984 at the very first International Tesla Society Symposium. And at that time, she was living a very different kind of a life. And now she's going into another phase of life. She's recently liberated from a state job. That's how she put it. And she's focusing on bridging science and especially physics and spirituality. Previously, she worked in water infrastructure, regulation, communications. She has a BA and a master's degree in cultural anthropology. She graduated summa cum laude. And she's worked with a group to promote a Tesla film, among many projects that she's done. And she did her master's thesis on human values and worldview, which at the time she did that was not a very well-known topic, and she helped bring that more forward into public debate. She describes herself as a finder as well as a seeker. Let's welcome Suzanne Price.
Thank you. Well, good morning. You know, the lights really are bright, and I'm standing up here wondering, is it really the lights or is it your shining faces? Because it's shining on your hair and it looks kind of mystical to me. This morning, it is my pleasure to introduce to you what may be a new concept. Actually, I think it's kind of an old concept. I'm calling it Qualar physics, and I think it's the wave of the future. Now, I'm using a phrase here, wave. I really think it's a cosmic wave. It could be what Dan Davidson was talking about earlier, the logos. So let's begin. I've got a lot of material here, and so I'm going to be kind of going da-da-da-da-da-da. And some of it, I may be going too fast, but we'll give it a shot because I'd like to get through this material so that you can understand my concept. First of all, what is Qualar physics? Now, I would like to acknowledge that this term is not my term, but comes from two of my spiritual teachers, Haska Harrison, a spiritual teacher and healer, and Jonah. And that term came from them, and it has been described as an amalgamation of several different areas, including quantum mechanics, string and M theory, scalar physics, consciousness research, and universal spirituality. So it spans the whole gamut, not just one piece. Because when you think about it, all of science is spiritual, and spirituality is also very scientific. By the way, I do want to also mention that these wonderful pictures of the wave come from Clark Little in Hawaii. He's a surfer, and now he has a marvelous gallery of photos of waves. He says he climbs, he gets in there, he gets his camera ready, he takes the shot, and then he says he lets the wave beat him up. Okay, why am I doing this? I have a very strong interest in melding or weaving together what has become very separate, science and universal spirituality, specifically physics in this case. There's been an age-old argument, probably started before Plato and Aristotle, but it's been there. It's a priori knowledge versus reason and materialism. It's been going on for a long time through the age of reason up to the point where our whole Western society is relying on scientific materialism. And I think they've been doing it to the denial of universal spirituality and so on and so on. Now, some of our problems that are stemming from this is that we don't really talk the languages together here. We don't have a common terminology for talking about spirituality, consciousness, paranormal activity, and some of the sciences. So we're handicapped by that. We're handicapped by translation, and we're handicapped by the insistence on science very rigorous criteria for measurement and verification. It's kind of like, what will you accept as evidence? Just how much will you accept to verify your null hypothesis for significant levels, for example? And I think that it's time for a paradigm shift. Because if a unified field theory doesn't include everything, I don't think we've got a unified theory at all. So what I'm going to do in this talk is take a structural and functional approach to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking for features, patterns, characteristics that I'm going to see from the data that I am presenting to you. I'm going to extrapolate it by an analysis. And then I'm going to compare it with what various spiritual masters, adepts, cosmologists, and so forth, who are very familiar and experts in the universal works, universal spirituality works, with what scientists, physicists, and others have had to say about the way energy actually works. My model for this is good old Dmitri Mendeleev. Now, he was the first one to publish, so he got the credit. But what he did was really very interesting. He put down what they knew about the elements in the periodic table, or what was to become the periodic table. He put them on cards with all of their characteristics. And then he played this little game of shuffling them around to see where the groupings were by characteristics and so forth. And he came up with this first chart of the elements. And he also played around with relationships that they had, which you can see is kind of interesting patterns here. And this is what we've got today. And we can thank Mendeleev and some others who put their hard work into it to get us going. And Mendeleev sort of laid the groundwork for predicting what they were to find in the future. And in fact, I think we have also come up with about 5 new elements since 2000. My investigation here is the topics I'm going to cover. Tesla has a contribution that I think is very unique, so he's our guy, so I'm tying him in. Then I'm going to look at our Vedic heritage, which is something that Tesla was extremely interested in, and kind of broaden that out to a discussion of the cosmic worlds, and you'll see why when I get there and we go through this. Then I'm going to take a brief look at string and M theories, and some of the alternative unified field theories that are out there, and how do they compare, what can they teach us? All right, that's going to lead me into a discussion of sacred geometry, harmonic codes, and structural patterns thereof. And finally, I'm going to fold in some information about consciousness, subtle energy, paranormal activity, and some biological research. Okay. So let's start out with Tesla. There he is. Well, we already know that he was very, very familiar with energies, and he described the universe as a kinetic system filled with energy that could be harnessed at any location. We all know that. And we know by 1891, he was also had a lot of inventions behind him already, including the famous Tesla coil transformer. Now, it so happened that in 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair, where Tesla was also honored, by the way, he happened to meet Swami Vivekananda from India. And Vivekananda was a Vedanta and yoga master at that time, and he was on a 3-year world tour. He met many of the famous scientists of the day, including Tesla, Walter Russell, William Thomson, who became Lord Kelvin, and the like. And he wanted to introduce the Vedic teachings and the Vedanta to the West, and in addition to that, he wanted to verify and show them that the Hindu cosmology was in perfect parallel and balance and harmony with what science had to offer in those days. And I think you'll be surprised at some of the information I'm going to show you. This information, by the way, I would like to credit Toby Groats, who was the president of the International Tesla Society way back in '84 when I met him, and he did a research paper on the influence of the Vedic teachings on Tesla's understanding of energy. So what happened was, in this story, that our debonair Tesla here met Swami Vivekananda at a party hosted by Sarah Bernhardt. And they had been in the audience when she was playing the role of Eziel, which is the story of the life of Buddha. They were in the audience, she noticed it, and she invited them to a party, which is the place where they met together. They hit it off, and Tesla was very interested in this. Of course, Sarah Bernhardt was too, and had studied it quite a bit. In a letter dated 1896, Swami Vivekananda had the following to say: Mr. Tesla was charmed to hear about the Vedantic prana and akasha and the kalpas, which according to him are the only theories modern science can entertain. Mr. Tesla thinks he can demonstrate mathematically that force and matter are reducible to potential energy. I'm to go to see him next week to get this mathematical demonstration. Well, apparently Tesla was not able to demonstrate it at that time, and it wasn't until Einstein came along, which was 10 years later or so, that was able to occur. However, among the papers, are we still going here? Okay. Among the papers and the research that Toby found, here's something that I think is very interesting to illustrate that there's not much information out there to prove this, but apparently Tesla was quite taken with the teachings, and he had this to say in one of his unpublished papers, which is from one of his biographers, O'Neill, and it's called Man's Greatest Achievement, which was written apparently around 1907. He says, and this is important because this gives us some good clues. There manifests itself in the fully developed being, man, a desirous, mysterious, inscrutable, and irresistible, to imitate nature, to create, to work himself the wonders he perceives. Long ago he recognized that all perceptible matter comes from a primary substance, or tenuity beyond conception, filling all space, the akasha, or luminiferous ether, which is acted upon by the life-giving prana, or creative force, calling into existence in never-ending cycles all things and phenomena. And here's a key sentence. The primary substance, thrown into infinitesimal whirls of prodigious velocity, becomes gross matter. The force subsiding, the motion ceases, and matter disappears, reverting to the primary substance. Now, I think some of the key words here are infinitesimal whirls of prodigious velocity, becoming gross matter. Now, what I want to do is segue then into what this Vedanta philosophy has to offer very briefly, so you'll see why Tesla was interested and what he may have learned from it and what we can learn from it. The Vedic texts are very ancient, and they come to us from the mysterious ancient past. Some say they're 5,000 years old, others have claimed 18,000 years ago, occurring in the Indus Valley. And these texts include the Rig Veda, the Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, Upanishads, and the Brahma Sutras. They're very, very extensive. These are written in Sanskrit, and they were in the oral tradition for quite some time until somewhere between the 7th and 4th centuries BC, where they were written down. They run the gamut of information from hymns, prayers, myths, historical accounts, dissertations on science and the nature of reality, and so forth. There are many similar beliefs, tenets, themes, and worldviews of other world faiths that correspond with these values. This may include, and not be limited to, Buddhism, including Japanese Zen, mystic Christianity, mystic Judaism through the Kabbalah, Sufism, Taoism, and the Native American traditions. Some of the beliefs include all is infinite consciousness, and consciousness is Brahman. Brahman would be the equivalent to God, I guess you would say. This source is infinite light. Its attributes are indescribable, formless, and beyond the human senses. Brahman is absolute, the only reality, and everything else is illusion. Brahman is the origin of all forces, substances, existence, innate knowledge, and transcendental spirit. The world reflects transcendent and pragmatic aspects of the Brahman. Truth is independent of time and space, and humans have to work through their Maya or illusion to achieve liberation or realization of the inner or higher self and the Brahman or God realization. Now, specifically, Swami Vivekananda and Tesla were interested in Advaita Vedanta and yoga, and there's two parts to this. One of them is the scientific knowledge, which is the Samkhya cosmology, and the other is the yoga, which they worked in tandem. Yoga was the technology they used to acquire this information, okay? It has many parallels in physics, in its theory of energy and matter, that is the Samkhya cosmology. For example, these people actually knew about the atomic theory. This was called the Vaisesika. And again, I said the Samkhya is the knowledge or science. And one thing I do want to point out to you is that Hinduism is very complex. So a lot of people have an image of what this must be like. But there are 6 major branches of this. There's many, many lineages and teachers and so on and so forth. So there's an intellectual side, there's a ritual side. I mean, you can find just about anything in it. In this particular one, and what appealed to Tesla was that it was dualistic, that is, spirit and matter were equal but distinct. It was materialistic, the basis of the world is phenomenal and material. Pluralistic, each individual is an autonomous being, and rational, relies on reason and evidence. So you can see that would have been very appealing to Tesla. A few words on the theory of creation. Now, Brahman as the highest, I just want to point out something interesting. The sound bur in Sanskrit actually means to expand and sprout, and it's akin to a pebble dropping in a still pond and the ripples thereof, okay? They felt that there were 5 subtle elements. Ether, there you go, created by Maya though, and from ether, it begot air, which begot fire, which begot water, and begot earth. This is held throughout the ancient world, up until more modern times. Elements in combination form gross elements, and from gross elements sprang the universe and all other life. And what I think is interesting, as a sideline, is that from the ether and the gross elements, I'm wondering if dark matter comes into play there, because dark matter, they have discovered, has been, through time, billions of years, has gone from about 63% in the universe down to something like 21%. Why is that? Well, they don't know, and we really don't know that much about dark matter either. Okay, so here, this is really interesting. Now, understand that this is from a translation. Okay. Here's what the Vedas say about atoms, which they called paramanus. There are 6 kinds of quarks, 6 types of antiquarks, quarks and leptons, electron, positron, neutron, and each particle is a little smaller than 10 to the minus 18ths. The paramanu, which they considered the building blocks of matter, is 0.79 times 10 to the minus 22. This contrasts with the atom as defined by Western science as 10 to the minus 10. So they were in the ballpark, but theirs is quite a bit smaller. Ganus, or modes, they were like the glue, I guess you could say, of the paramanus, were all mixed up. So they resulted in varieties of quarks and leptons. And as those got assembled, they resulted in mesons, protons, hadrons, baryons, and neutrons. And the Paramatma, which means super soul, I guess this would be akin to Brahman, controls the types and intensities, and they describe this as light adjusted. Now, everybody in this audience I hope, should be asking themselves the question, if it were 5,000 to 18,000 years ago, how did they know that? Because this is the modern particle chart, and they were right on. They were right on. Now the other side, I mentioned there's a scientific side to the Advaita Vedanta. Now there's the yoga side, taught by Vivekananda. And this is the place where you're preparing your inner self to receive information, to be in harmony with all these vibrations. And it's also elucidated, by the way, in the Bhagavad Gita. These are scientific techniques of meditation which they used for liberation. Yoga actually means union with God, and it's the goal of their discipline, that side of the dual. And the features of this are in contrast to the other one that I gave you. They're non-dualistic. The material world originates from spirit. Individuals are part of an encompassing self and relies on knowledge from scripture. So they were able to balance the two between the more mystical side and the more scientific side. Somehow they were able to do that, which is something that I think that we need to be working toward as well. Now, as it has evolved through time, I would like to introduce you to the modern yoga, which I think is the very best one there is, and there's a purpose behind my doing that. And this is called Surat Shab Yoga. It is part of the Sant Mat way, which is called the Path of the Masters. And what Surat means is soul, Shab means sound current, and yoga means union. And it refers to the audible life stream. Okay, more about that in a minute, which involves infinite frequencies, harmonic wave patterns, innate information, and which drives consciousness. Okay, and the whole idea by using this form of yoga, and a lot of you are familiar with the more physical forms of yoga, this is a much more spiritual, not to say the other isn't, but this involves meditation and so on. The idea here is to attune, realign, or harmonize your subtle energetic bodies so they are in harmony with the way energy is. It also works in tandem with inner light. Now I put this gentleman here, Kirpal Singh. He is an extraordinary man, and he brought this form of yoga to America in about 1957, again to introduce it like Swami Vivekananda did, to introduce it to us. And he also came, I believe he was with, I know that he advocated peace, and he received many honors for doing that. He was like a president of I've forgotten the organization, excuse me. But he was the head of a world organization for world religion unity, I believe it was. And so he is the founder of certain paths here. And by the way, this Surat Shab Yoga is practiced by other faiths, such as Ekankar, which is a Western sort of variation. It's practiced by Ruwani and Radhaswami Satsang as well. Some of you may be familiar with these paths, but they emphasize spiritual exercises using light and sound. Now, throughout the world, light and sound has been very important. Plato thought that the cosmos was built of musical intervals and proportions. Pythagoras referred to the music of the spheres. Heraclitus, another Greek, the Bible mentioned the logos, the divine word or sound. The Hindus, the Sufis, the Native Americans all have their version, as do the Sikhs. So I'm not going to dwell there too much because I really want to get into some scientific stuff for us, but I wanted to give you a background on this to show you some of the elements that are here. We can also see in some of our alternative unified field theories. This is a chart that I got from Dale Pond. It's a little bit dated, but it attempts to show from solid matter here up to liberated pure energy and correlate this with consciousness and correlate it with different levels of frequency or vibration or degrees of matter. And here is the ancient one. Okay, God's up here, Earth is down here, and so on. Here's Keeley's, and here's sort of a modern rendition, and there's some others. Not going to dwell here too much to explain it because I got a better one than this. They do not necessarily correspond across the board, but are merely a general rendition. Now this one, I think, is the best one. And this is an adaptation from Eckankar, which is a direct path to self-realization and God-realization that I'm very familiar with. Its goal is, those are its two goals, and it teaches direct experience with the God force through primarily spiritual exercises, which utilize the light and the sound. So what we have here is we have the different levels of awareness and consciousness. Down here, this is called the first grand division, and this right here you'll recognize is the etheric. That's where everybody's working. The etheric, mental, causal, astral, and physical, and what some of its characteristics are, and what its, I'll call it a mantra, but it's a sound that is basically represents that level. Then we've got the dividing line. This is the second grand division, which is formless, and it can only be known by light and sound. And here's some sounds you can recognize from the inner planes. It's your inner ear and your inner eyes. Some of you may have experienced these. And this, say, for example, from the Bible, celestial sounds, music of the woodwinds, 1,000 violins, humming, wind, the single note of a flute. These, if you had the experience, would help you identify what level of awareness or consciousness you might be on. And so what the students of Eckankar do, working through a spiritual master, they learned these techniques, yogic techniques, for accessing these different planes. It's all based on frequency or vibration. Now, you probably can't see this very well, but here, the astral plane is the emotional. It's the source of psychic phenomena, reached by astral projection, and a source of the occult sciences. A lot of people are having experiences in these levels of consciousness without realizing it. You're doing it in your dreams, sometimes your daydreams. Sometimes you're working on emotional problems. Sometimes you might have a past memory. That would be here. There's no coincidence that tinkling bells is the sound you might hear on the inner when you're remembering something. And it's no mystery that people take vacations by the seaside to relax their emotions because the roar of the sea is relaxing to that part of your subtle bodies. Much more could be said about this, but it's all based on frequency. And to access these, you can learn some techniques by using mantras to put your bodily vibrations in a state where you may have an experience with it. A lot of people get bogged down for all kinds of reasons. I call them the monkeys of the mind, incorrect beliefs, stresses and strains, physical problems that deter them. Call it karma of some kind if you want to. But that's the reason why most people can't. But we all have the capability within us to access these if we want to. Now, the interesting thing is the chakras in the body, it corresponds directly. There are 12, by the way, 12 levels. Now, some people say there's more, and there are 12 realms within each of those levels. Within the human body, we have the same thing. We've got 12 chakras corresponding to these bodies. And more about, some people have different renditions of this. Some say 22, some say 7, some say 9. But I'm going to go with the 12 for now. And here you've got them. Others have talked about this at the conference. Here they are, the crown chakra and above. These are wheels, these are centers for transmission of energy that is coming from the primal source, the cosmic wave. They're rotating vortices. They form part of all the subtle bodies that are us. They balance bodily functions, are associated with glands, spectrums of light, states of consciousness, and so forth. The cosmic wave enters here into the body, and it flows throughout the meridians, which are called gateways, down into the body. Again, we can get bogged down there with past karma, what we've been born with, what we accumulate, and we attempt to heal these throughout our lives in order to not only feel better, but also be able to be more in tune with our inner bodies. I guess that's the best way to put it. Now, in summary on this part, here's what I see about it. I keep this in mind. From this information, I see absolute oneness. And corresponding over here, I'm going to say it's a monism. It's everything. We call it God. I'm going to call it the primal source from here on out. An attribute of this that I don't think anybody's going to disagree with me on is unconditional love. And that is defined as all frequencies. There is no discrimination. I'm going to say it has innate knowledge, innate information. I'm going to call these inherent frequencies as well as discrete frequencies. They're all frequencies, but it has inherent knowledge, inherent frequencies. This is consciousness. This is, we'll call them aware frequencies. It contains energy. I'm going to call these light frequencies. And I'm going to call it inner light. I'm going to say those are electromagnetic frequencies. And it includes the audible live stream, the sound current. I'm going to say those are harmonic frequencies. Let's just go with that for the moment. You may disagree with me on a couple of them, but I hope not. Okay, I threw this in because it's an optical cable. There's a little bit of an analogy here where I see information is coming from the primal source. It is coming in information packets, waves. I wouldn't say it's particles, but it's descending into the physical planes at the etheric level. I forgot to mention something important there. I'm going to say it now. At the etheric level, where we're all working, a spiritual law comes into play, which is called the Law of Polarity. And this is where it splits into dualities of positive and negative and all the other opposites that we've got. It's also called the Law of Opposites. So it's like a mono something coming from the first grand division, and then when it splits off into dualities. Okay, so the light's coming down here into the physical plane. I just thought it was kind of cool. I'm not sure the analogy completely goes across the board, but I thought I'd put that in there. Okay, now we're going to look at how does this compare with science. Okay, the standard model. Quantum mechanics and general relativity still aren't agreeing with each other. It's based on gravity as the force, and they still haven't found a graviton, which is a big problem, or maybe they think they might have. I don't know. There's a lot of problems with this that various people have elucidated in the past. We still don't know. Forces or particles, which is it? We don't know. Well, I kind of like information packets. I don't know. Okay, Unsolved Mysteries, a lot of them. I made a mistake here. I put elusive, it should have been elusive, but either one works for me. Graviton, here you've got a theory based on gravity, and you can't even find a graviton after 40 years. That's a problem. Big Bang Theory. I'm not sure that I agree with that one, and in fact, if some of you have paid attention to the news, you may have seen that recently scientists have looked through the Hubble telescope, and they have found out in deep space, where 3 billion years ago, a bar star galaxy was forming, and it blew them away. Enough said. Black holes, I know I still think that's a controversy. I have some opinions about it, but I'll skip that. Dark energy, dark matter, okay, we still don't know what that is, and they're trying to figure it out. We know one expands, the other contracts. We're not sure. We know that dark matter has been decreasing over billions of years, and why is that? Higgs boson, yay, they think they found it. I can tell you one thing, it's a misnomer to call it a God particle. It's not a God particle. There's no way God could be described as a particle. Okay, that being said by a materialist who probably came up with it, they found something. It's probably another quark, and they think that it's describing mass, or it's going to be able to enable them to figure out how mass forms. But I'm not going to get into that here. Some of the other problems with the standard model, just can't deal with non-local, non-linear phenomenon, or entanglement, or paranormal or psi research, consciousness research, and certainly there's a total absence of universal spirituality, so that's completely ignored. And there you have the Higgs. Okay, string theory. Now, I happen to think there's something to do with string theory. Of course, that's kind of evolved through the classical Newtonian physics, and there's been a plethora of all kinds of theories about strings. But I think there's something to this. And this is what they say, that quarks and electrons in an atom are one-dimensional oscillating strings that carry packets of information. And they think that this can reconcile general relativity and quantum mechanics. There's all kinds of mathematical models, and they've come up with superstrings and supersymmetry and different theories about membranes also coming in, until finally they've come up with, oh, I threw this in because this is a picture in deep space, which kind of suggests strings. Although when I looked at it, I said to myself, that could also look like the neurons and synaptic nodes of the brain, don't you think? Ed Witten has come up with a really cool theory where he postulates there are 11 dimensions. This is M theory. 1 of space and 10 of other. And that comes close to the 12 dimensions that we think of in terms of the body and in describing the cosmic worlds. This is a picture of the 6D Calabi-Yau manifold. It's only 6 dimensions, but this shows you the folding in. Another theory out there by Garrett Lisi, he's a surfer, by the way, but he loves math, and he spent a lot of time out of doors and has seen into the geometric nature of things. And he came up with one here where he took the particle chart, and then he postulated, just assumed that we could find the missing parts. He created these beautiful geometries of relationships. Okay, there he is enjoying the surf. So he tried to unify the standard model with this by, he calls it principal bundle connection, which breaks down to the strong, electro-weak, gravitational, and then he uses the frame Higgs plus 3 generations of fermions, and so on it goes. And he kind of fudged the algebra on that one to make it fit, and so on and so on. I think it's really very beautiful what he has done, and I have a purpose for including this because of the geometries that I'm going to discuss. Here's another one of the charts he used to create, from these relationships, absolutely beautiful geometries. Another person to discuss, this one a totally different nature, is Nikolai Kozarev, and he has a torsion theory. Kozarev was a brilliant astrophysicist. The Russians didn't like him too much and Stalin threw him in prison, but his friends got him out, and he went on to actually be a founder of many of the Russian sciences, and quite a few of them came out of his torsion work. Prior to the Michelson-Morley experiments, which kind of put a kibosh on etheric theories, well, he kind of revised that by proving that all physical matter is an ether of individual conscious energy. So he did us a real favor by bringing that back into the arena of science. Now, throughout here, I'm going to just pick things. This may not explain this theory very comprehensively to you if you don't know, so I would invite you to check out information about them on the website. I can give you some references if you like, because I need to rush through this. I've got so much information. I just picked out different elements that I thought were essential to the theory, but also were points that I wanted to make. All right? Without movement, there is no time, he postulated. He said spiraling energy is the true nature of time, and spiraling or torsion waves are self-propelling. Fields travel at superluminal speed through space. Particles, he said, have right and left-handed torsion, so they're going both ways. And dynamic complex torsion is dependent on energy release. It is static without energy release. Physical matter is sponge-like. It can absorb it and then release it. And distortion affects matter and phase transformations. Now, that's one, torsion. Another one comes from Mehran Keshi. He's gotten more attention lately. He wrote a book called Universal Order of Creation of Matters, 2009, I believe. And his theory, as a nuclear physicist, depends on plasma magnetic fields. He thinks this is the grand unifier. Okay. He says gravity is produced by the interaction of two plasmatic fields. I'm going to go through this quick. Mass is the difference between the magnetic field strength of similar and dissimilar field strength, gravity and magnetic forces, for example. Energy is the measure of the magnetic field that is transferred between magnetic fields at a speed that enables it to move from one field to another. Electromagnetic current is the rate of movement of the magnetic field from one field to another, where the magnetic field is due to magnetic field strength difference and is equal to the magnetic field strength of an electron. Well, that's a lot of words there, but perhaps more simply, he said there are many different kinds of magnetic field strengths which can interact or entangle into larger dynamic spherical packs, and interaction of these packs can lead to gravitational and magnetic effects and properties, and into an initial fundamental plasma or neutron. All of these orders of magnitude field strengths have three basic types of matter, which is really interesting here, including dark matter, antimatter, and matter. Of course, I'm not quite sure where he came up with dark matter, but I haven't read the book, I'll admit it. He says these all originate from a cosmic soup, and the interaction of these plasmatic magnetic fields produce light, by the way, as a dynamic, spiral, helical, cylindrical composite possessing all three types of matter. And further, he says light has innate intelligence whose visibility is magnetic field strength dependent. Now here is an illustration of what he says. Here's the neutron, and it has dark matter, antimatter, and matter. And then when this decays, it goes into the proton and the electron, and he says they have all the same properties, which I think is interesting. And furthermore, again, I haven't seen the book, but he has a chapter in his book on dark light. So we have dark energy, dark matter, and dark light. Dark light has not even been discovered yet, but if he did discover it, it may be worth, and he can demonstrate this and verify it, it may be worth a Nobel laureate. I haven't ever seen that before. I think that's in the last slide down here. Dark light. I was amazed to see that in his table of contents. Interesting, worth investigating. Another theory worth looking at is by Daniel Fitzpatrick and verified mathematically by Milo Wolf in a book that Fitzpatrick titled Universities Asleep at the Switch, which he wrote in 1966. So he's been beating the drum for quite a long time. His theory is quantum chunks, and it's all about unification of forces based on the concept of phase and relative motion and the relative motion laws of Ampere. He says, phase universe is a steady state of quanta chunks, not fields. They're spherical, spinning, scalar wave entities. And quantum of energy is the release of binding energy between a spin-up electron binding with a spin-down electron when both are in the same spin field. And interestingly, I will point out, he says these occur at 90-degree angles of motion of all electrons involved, and so on. And he says further, space is the average phase relationship between the closest sides of all quantum bricks, his quantum chunks, in phase equals attraction, out of phase, repulsion. And he says gravity is caused by the relative spin motion phase in coherence. Very interesting theory, I think. And further, he says scalar spin frequency of the electron determines time, space, and forces. Both electrons and quarks are types of standing waves. Let's see here. The quark accounts for gravity as apparent acceleration. Space is a steady state universe, not accelerating. He was in favor of the string theory. He thought it was right. And he also said that we live in a scalar world at a lower frequency than the quantum world. So there's some patterns, I think, that are beginning to develop here. Now I'm going to go on with a person who has presented here on a couple of occasions in 2007 and 8, David Ureth, and he collaborated with Donald Ayers. And his theory is that there are no forces, there's just self-organizing criticality and Y bias. One moment, please. His model is a simple one, of scalar interactions described by basic processes of Y angularity combined to operationalize processes of intrinsic self-organizing criticality at 22.5 to 54.75 degrees. So again, like Fitzpatrick, we are talking about an angle of interaction. These combine to produce a space-time continuum as 4D space of local linear, non-local, nonlinear field effects. And he defines mass, magnetism, gravitational field effects, and integrates Whittaker's attributes, Mandelbrot fractal geometries, and the Fibonacci series to resolve certain cosmological issues. But let me be a little more, get into this a little more. He says, Y bias determines coherence where the degree of angularity is caused by spin polarized charge ensembles. And this Y bias, this self-organizing Y bias, occurs at all scales in nature as an open complex system. The forces of time, energy, and matter are constantly being constructed and deconstructed from the physical vacuum. And he goes on to describe in some detail in his monograph that there are 10 distinct scales of quantum complexity at 0 point. So he's starting at the etheric vacuum 0 point. See, again, we've got all these terms. And the first one, there's balance. There's no activity. Stasis. Then, he says, comes time. Then comes subquarks at the 4th level quarks. Then hadrons and leptons at the 6th atoms form. Then complex molecules on up to the complex forms of galaxies and so on. He says, at the 3rd scale, spin polarized charge ensembles, photons, demonstrate properties of mass, which is very interesting. And of course, he asks the question, consciousness, is it a manifestation of self-organizing criticality, or does it come directly from the source? Here we go. And here's a couple of examples. Here's a 4th scale Bose-Einstein condensate, an emerging vortex rotating. Here's a soliton, and here at the 9th scale is the Uranus soliton. I'm going through these real quick, so I hope you understand. One of the last ones I'm going to look at here is sequential physics, another unified field theory. Rod Johnson is the person in a paper called Theoretical Study of Structures and Stabilities of Iron Clusters. It's a paper, but he comes up with a really interesting concept called particle mesh. It's based on superstring theory. And he says matter in the universe is formed of groupings or fields of an interconnected geometric matrix of nested Platonic solids. And he says the atoms are counter-rotating energy forms specifically rooted in the octahedron and the tetrahedron. And I'm going to be talking more about these Platonic solids shortly. Each is vibrating in a pulsing shape that corresponds to a different density of matter of ether. He felt, and I believe this also corresponds to Keeley, that the universe is structured from true primary levels of ether which continually interact with one another. So you think there's 2 layers of ether. Okay, and this is not quite correct. I wanted to give you the idea of a mesh. If you were to imagine octahedron and a tetrahedron instead of this is the Y-Calabi configuration. Johnson says there's no hard particles, only geometric groups of energy. And atoms form a harmonic ether vortex with spherical symmetry, merging together into greater levels of unity and coherence about a central axis, forming a spherical torus. Additional theories, I'm not just going to mention a little bit. Milo Wolf has space resonance, a scalar wave theory. He says the spherical wave centers in quantum ether, there's electric spin interaction there. We've heard last year from Dave Talbot, or was it Wald? I don't know. But anyway, the electric universe model is another one that's there where the electrostatic force unifies the nuclear force, magnetism, and gravity. The Keeley model, Dale Pond has also come to speak about the sympathetic vibratory physics. I'm in agreement with a lot of that stuff there. He says the negative magnetic force causes rotation of particles into matter. There are 7 distinct subdivisions of matter, nested levels in a vacuum. okay? And apparently talked last year about the mind force as the hidden scalar potential force which disturbs the equilibrium of the wave. Yeah, I can dig that. Okay, here we go. And here's a model of this. I don't have time to go into it that he provided, starting with the indefinite and the vacuum here as it goes, as it creates into matter and then deconstructs and goes in a circle of creation. I put this slide in here. It's a painting on a wall in India. It describes the elephant and the wise men. Oh, I'm sorry, the blind men. But what I really want to say is that, sure, the elephants in the room, we're looking for the secrets to it. We only know parts of it. Every one of these theories has something to offer. I think they're very wise men. But all of them, and they have something to contribute. What we need to do is we need to reconfigure this, and we need to look at this, because nobody has it absolutely right. But I think collectively that we can do that. So what I'm saying about this level is, what we're looking at in terms of features is resonance, okay? And we're looking at spinning particles or energy fields that are coupling at right angles, the y-bias and its degrees, whether it's Yerth or Fitzpatrick's ideas. We're dealing with torsion fields, and torsion has a big play in here. Self-organizing at all scales, forming Platonic solids, forming geometric harmonics, including the Fibonacci ratio and other forms. We had interacting levels, phase coherence or incoherence. We're multidimensional and subset realms listed. We're talking about scalar waves and transverse waves, and I think we've got the whole gamut right there all together. And maybe some of these waves are coming, like a cosmic wave could be coming from one level, and then we could be seeing at other levels transverse waves. So they're all mixed in together, and we're trying to figure it out. Which one is it, or is it all of them? It's all of them. Okay, we're also seeing polarization at 0 point. And we also have mentioned a perpetual pump in terms of creation. It just keeps on pumping. All right, now a little bit about geometry. How am I doing for time here? Can anybody tell me? I want to mention, I want to give credit to one of my teachers, one of our own here, Danae Harding, has done a lot to teach us all about Platonic solids. She's done a wonderful job, and I recommend her work very much. But here I'm going to mention Robert Gilbert in a book called All of Creation is Moving Light. He says, sacred geometry is a blueprint of creation and the genesis of all form. Here we have the Platonic solids. Every scale and pattern conforms to geometry. The ancients believed that geometry had very sacred significance in evolving consciousness and the profound mystery of awareness. I think so too. So, the Greek mystery schools taught the 5 perfect 3D forms called the Platonic solids, the foundation of everything in the world that we know of: the tetrahedron, the hexahedron, octahedron, dodecahedron, and the icosahedron. Interestingly enough, I threw in this, Robert Moon, University of Chicago, at first was ridiculed when he tried to show that each of the elements in the periodic table he could create from their configurations Platonic solids. He was laughed at, but later on he proved it to be true. Now, some of the forms that we see in nature. This is fascinating to me. Starting with, now that's a rotating tetrahedron, okay? It's a star tetrahedron, which is also called the Star of Creation. Some people also know this as the Star of David. Merkaba. The word means 2 counter-rotating spinning light fields. That's Mer. Ka is individual spirit, and Ba is interpretation of reality. So with the star tetrahedron, you see 2 interpenetrating 3-sided pyramids to form a 3D star of creation. It's the vehicle we use to connect one to life, to the universe, to divine love. And guess what? This is Garrett Lisi's rendition. Is kind of faded out here, but it's actually a star tetrahedron. And remember, sequential physics, where he's talking about the octahedron and the spinning tetrahedron. Phi, Some mention has been made of this throughout, so I won't go into it a lot, but this is another one of the forms. These are energy emitters that provide carrier-like waves capable of facilitating coupling with higher harmonic frequencies found throughout nature. Spinning, emitting. Whoops, I got mixed up here. Okay, now we've got the circle and the sphere are these forms. Primal containers for energy and consciousness. The vortex forms circulates and transmits energy and consciousness from one place to another. And I find this form, which is a water vortex, to be absolutely awesome. Every time I look at it, it's mysterious. Okay, so the Greeks saw 4 of the 5 solids as archetypal patterns of earth, air, fire, and water. Okay, maybe that's why. And it should be no surprise to us that the 5th solid was viewed as the pattern behind the life force, which he called ether. Okay, they also thought that the dodecahedron was a very, very sacred form and felt that all the other forms could fit inside of it. And Plato even mentioned that he thought that the earth could have that shape, and it was verified in the 70s by Russian scientists that the earth has a kind of a dodecahedron shape. Here's one rendition. Here's another rendition with the flower of life within it. The flower of life, another geometric form we find in nature. Now I'm going to tell you a little about this. Story of creation in stages from the circle to Metron's cube to Platonic solids, how that works. This is called the language of light and the language of silence. The language of silence is also known as the sound current. So again, we have light and sound. I'm calling them inner sound. Okay, in sacred geometry, in pristine form, the flower of life is constructed of transcendent matter or the fabric of consciousness. Here's 2 renditions. This one is from an ancient temple in Egypt. Starts out with a cascading circle. Forms a vesica Pisces, and this goes into these different forms until it makes the torus. How about that? And this is the female side of it. Next, we go to the seed of life, which looks like this, and it's actually an embryonic form. And it has angles to it, which reflects the male aspect of it. Finally, we have the flower of life. It sets up the fruit of life stage in Metatron's cube. So here we have it. Here's Metatron's cube right there, and then the other 5 Platonic solids. So this includes the inner star, the tetrahedron here. And here's an example of the flower of life with the Kabbalah tree of life within it. So you see these are all interconnected, starting with the primal circle. I've got 5 minutes. Are you sure?
On the presentation, then you'll have 5 minutes Q&A.
There's no way I'm going to get through this. So, okay, here's Garrett. I'm gonna have to zip through this because I want to come to some conclusions. And I hope that you're going to bear with me a little bit on this. Here's Garrett Lucy's form, the Metatron's cube. David Sarita has given us some information about hidden codes of the universe. He says fractals and Mandelbrot sets don't exist that way. In nature, they're imperfect. And I think when you think about that, you'll agree with it. And he says, well, you know, I really don't have time, unfortunately, to go into this unless you grant me that. But he talks about differentials as co-creating dimensions, different dimensions of spin. And he goes into this. There's the Mandelbrot sets. And here's an example of, you can just see visually, you know, it's not that perfect. Nature is not. He describes how this works, the energy flows in different forms. And then he gives us, here's a whole series of counter-rotational twin wave vortices overlapping in a pool of water. This is really interesting, how they form the vesica. You can't see it well, it's faded. The vesica Pisces, how it starts illuminating around the edges, okay? And clockwise and counterclockwise as these 2 vortices are producing a differential. You can't see it at all. There are emerging geometries within here at angles. It's really interesting as these waves created within are pulsing and colliding. And why bias, maybe? Okay, here's a bigger example of that. You can see some of the geometries that are forming here, okay? Here's another one. Here's where we've got a kind of a baseball diamond. All right, not all sides are equal. Finally, this is developing to, guess what? A toroid. Ha! All right, and it's developing. Here we've got a rodent claw. Here we've got now, it keeps on going until it develops into a two-layered hexagon. I thought that was fascinating. So I see that differentials are really very important in these spinning vortices. We see it in nature everywhere. Wish I could talk about these a bit more. We've had a very fine presentation of cymatics. Here's a crop circle. Here's the cymatics. More examples. To conclude, geometry, language of light and sound, 5 Platonic solids, the Merkaba, Metatron's cube, flower of life template. Phi is the energy emitter. The circle and sphere contain energy. The vortex circulates energy. Nature is not symmetrical. We have randomness and coherence, and it creates differentials. These differentials may create spin and dimensions, the golden spiral, spinning vortices. Rotation and counter-rotation drive geometric forms. There are geometric blueprints at all scales, increasing complexity, perpetual motion machine. I have very little time to talk about the paranormal. Here are some examples of it. Everybody has probably had contact or experienced it for yourself. Again, this is happening in this area here where people have it experienced, especially on the astral level. Some people who've worked on this that think it should be integrated with our standard science. Charles Tart, Claude Swanson has a synchronized universe theory. Others have talked about life after death, experiences and so on, what happens. Claude has an absolutely unique way of looking at this. Can't go into it, but he describes there are coherent levels. As things are spinning, they form meshes, they form levels, and we can access these by actually getting in sync or synchronized with them, with that frequency. There are other people who have consciousness theories. Amit Goswami, these people have been on What the Bleep Do We Know? They all think that consciousness is at the base of it. Fred Alan Wolf, known as Dr. Quantum, has written about it extensively. He thinks that his number one thing at the end is God is intelligent design created the universe. I think that's self-evident myself. John Hagelin has gone on, a very brilliant string theorist, then became interested in transcendental meditation with the Maharishi University of Management. William Tiller, who's a material scientist, is creating a psychoenergetic subfield where he thinks intention can affect matter and has proved it, and he uses intention imprinted electronic devices in experiments that have been successful. I do want to cover this. I have a few slides left, bear with me. The brain, in biological research, the brain has a structure to receive patterns and process information holographically as magnetic standing waves. The double helix DNA molecule is suited to generating waves of coherent photons. Cells are tiny radios capable of transmitting phase conjugation and synchronizing pattern arrays across different planes. To me, that's pretty amazing human potential that we can tap if we choose to. Okay, in summary, the universe is spiritual, created by intelligent design, a synchronized universe at all levels. Consciousness is primary, reflects a transcendent field. Psi phenomena reflects consciousness, subtle energy, forming accessible phase-coherent geometric arrays. Photons and electrons can communicate non-locally. Particles may be light. The human brain is holographic, has scalar potential, processes information with magnetic standing waves, can collapse the wave function, affects physical materials. The double helix DNA can store coherent photons, generate coherent light waves. The body, brain, DNA cells can access the unified field. We can rise above the self-referential circuit to transcendent levels via vibratory techniques. And in summary, My whole thing is, I think we have enough information to where we can start to piece together like Mendeleev did with the periodic table. We've got information, we've got features, we've got patterns that could go throughout. We can start with inner light and inner sound and work our way through it. And we can begin to share information so that people are more comfortable with doing it. I think that we need to broaden away from the standard model, include it certainly, and start looking at features of universal spirituality, consciousness, psi phenomena, subtle energy, and selected biological research information. I think we need to start doing integrated modeling, develop a common database of equivalent terminology, talk about it cross-disciplinary matter, and start developing some theories. And I think the time has come in this age. I leave you with the thought, we are pure spiritual beings living in a pure spiritual world, and there is no separation. I think Tesla tapped into his secrets. He says, the day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence. And I think that's true, and I applaud all of you inventors and researchers, because I think Tesla's work is helping us to delve into and reveal the secrets of the way energy actually works. And it's more than just free energy. It's free human beings. Thank you very much.
Whatever you have. We've got a couple of minutes for Q&A if you don't mind.
I'll give it a try.
Okay. Can I make one comment real quick?
Sure.
Regarding the Michelson-Morley experiment, they conducted this experiment that basically disproved the existence of ether. And when, is it okay? Okay. And the predominant ether physicist at the time, who had already been in a debate with Einstein and just wiped him across the table, went home and did the exact same experiment that Michelson-Morley did and found that there was ether, that there was in fact a sea of energy that we move in, that everything else is born out of. And 20 years later, I can't remember which one, Michelson or Morley comes back and confesses to the scientific community, we did the experiment wrong, we misled you all. And they didn't realize that until much later. So yes, absolutely, we move in a sea of energy. All other energies are born out of it, and it is definitely very conscious, this energy that we deal with. So just wanted to throw that out there as a little comment. I don't usually try and make a lot of comments, but I just want to let you know that. So great job.
Thanks, Vernon. Thank you.
With respect to your statement about graviton waves in late 1990s, I spent some time with Tom Bearden, and graviton waves do exist. They come at 19.5 degrees into the North Pole. They exit at the South Pole at 19.5 degrees. And the applications for them scientifically have already been made.
Okay.
All right, now I have a question. Where did you define the line between creationism versus where you started talking about there was a little bit of Greek mythology in there? Because from what I saw, you had the exact same label, and creationism, or intelligent design, whatever you want to call it, is completely and entirely different from Greek mythology. And you brought that up, and it just made me pull the red flag and go, hold on, what are you talking about?
I'm sorry. I was using Fred Alan Wolf's thought, I believe, and it is confusing when you talk about intelligent design is associated with creationism. And I think what we're talking about is a force, a primal force, a logos, whatever you want to call it, that has intelligence within it. So it is the force that is creating life, as we've tried to describe it here.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
On the same note, within creationism, it's not talking about earth, wind, fire, water, and ether. That's not creationism. That is the mythology, like you said. Creationism is completely different. It believes in one dominant power that created. So if you're going to talk about these two separate things, they need to be completely and entirely distinct so that you can show both sides of it and not seem like they're meshed together, because they're not at all.
Right. And in the interest of time, I've had to kind of squeeze everything together without explaining it. And this is a perfect example of how we need to define our terms together so we can talk intelligently about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
On one of your slides, the last sentence showed that you can rise above a certain level using vibrational techniques or something. Could you demonstrate that, please?
I will demonstrate it with what I have learned to be one of the highest frequencies that I have learned on my own spiritual path. And that was on one of the charts that you saw there. I did not cover it. This is an ancient term for God, and it is called the ancient hue, H-U, and it is drawn out in a chant, and they say that this is a vibration, a frequency of divine love, and it's a frequency that contains all frequencies. And I'll demonstrate it for you, okay? And you can chant this to yourself for a few minutes. People report that it's uplifting, that it can be used for protection even in a variety of uses, but it can be very calming. So here's one that I use for lifting up my spirits, okay? And you chant that again, and when you do it in a group, as it's rolling, it's very amazing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, David. I think that's why we call ourselves human.
That's exactly right. That means God-man.
I just a little bit comment. Is the problem we have is really about symbolism. We use symbolism.
I can't quite hear you.
I think the problem we have is we use symbolism. You know, I mean, we think that the physical mind is there to understand everything. It's not. The physical mind is there to only has the capability to only witness what has been created. It is the higher mind, the spiritual mind, that does the creation. So when you bring it down, you're lost it in the symbols.
You're what?
You have lost it because of the symbols. You lost. You lose so much of it by trying to put it into a symbol.
Right. It's basically a feeling in the heart, and it's a knowingness. We try as humans to grasp onto it, so we create images and symbols because it helps us to get a sense of it that we can actually understand in our human form.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yes. Hi.
Thank you, Suzanne.
I can't hear you very well.
Is this working? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I believe that the spiritual is not separated from the material. I mean, it's like matter is the same as energy. So, I mean, the symbols are part of the grander picture, which is the spiritual or the matrix within everything, where everything is contained. And yes, thank you for your marvelous presentation. I wanted to ask if this sacred geometry that was used to build cathedrals and other power places in the world, if you know about people or architects that are using it, considering the forces in the earth and like the ancients used to do, if there are architects that are building with this thinking in their minds.
I wish I could answer your question there. Maybe someone else in the audience knows of any modern buildings here. I mean, cathedrals typically use that. They're chapels.
So this knowledge is lost in the practical sense, you would say?
I don't think so. I think there are a lot of aware people who are trying to apply some of these principles. Yes, but in answer to your specific question about some form of architecture, I'm not aware of it at the moment. Is there anyone else here who might have a suggestion? The question is, he's asking, are there any examples of architecture that modern architecture, perhaps besides the ancient ones that we know of, like the pyramids and Awasla Chapel in the British Isles and so forth? Do you have an answer to that?
Yeah. Look up sacred architecture, sacred architecture. Their buildings designed based on these principles.
Okay, and can he find out who the architect is?
Just look up Google.
Yeah, I'll Google it. Thank you.
Yeah, sacred geometry.
Well, you know.
But y'all are welcome to come and meet up with Suzanne. We have to get ready for our next speaker, so if y'all could meet with her, I appreciate y'all's time, and I'd like you to give a round of applause personally.